David Smith here with another Flip Classroom math video. A few tips before we start. Remember that you can slow down or speed up the playback if that helps you follow along. You can also pause the video at any point to catch up with your notes or to try the problems before I explain them. Finally, you could turn on the captions and read my words below on the bottom of your screen. Today's topic, difference of squares. Now, this might be ringing a bell. In our expansion chapter, we also dealt with this pattern and we used it to our advantage. So I'd like to review that pattern real quick before we get started on these problems. So this was the pattern that we found in our expansion unit. And what we did is we just foiled something like this, and we got a squared for our first terms, minus ab for our last terms, plus ab for our inside terms, and then finally minus b squared for our last term. So now, when we did this, we noticed that these two are like terms and they can be combined, which means they go away. So our result was a squared minus b squared. And the main point of that lesson and understanding that pattern at that time was just to quickly go from, if you have one thing plus another times one thing minus that same other, you could skip the FOIL step and just go straight to the result there. Now, it was helpful there. Now, in factoring, it's even more important and more helpful, which is why we did it first in expanding. So let's take a look at this problem, and then I'm going to turn you loose on these two, and then I've got a few more to do after that. Notice that this is 3 squared, and this is x squared. So I can change this, and I can write it as 3 squared minus x squared. Now this is kind of an extra step. You won't need to do that, but I just want to make sure this is super clear. Check it out. This looks like that. One thing squared minus another thing squared. So that means you can go right over to this. So this would be 3 plus x times 3 minus x. Now that's pretty cool. Kind of hard to see that this thing would factor into that. Now, if you're not sure, you can always check. If you FOIL this, you're going to wind up all the way back here, or actually back there. Okay, so take a minute to digest that, and when you feel like you got it, give this one a try. Okay, let's see how you did. I'm going to go ahead and do that middle step again. This is still q squared. Now, minus 81, nice perfect square there, that's minus 9 squared. That's a 9. So now we can go straight to this step. This is going to be q plus 9 times q minus 9. Pretty cool, okay? Try this one. A little bit more complicated. Notice how I put a coefficient on my variable. It's a perfect square, so it shouldn't give you too much trouble. See what you get. Okay, let's try that one. Again, I'm going to write this step here with my squared on that. So 16x squared is the same as 4x squared. Do you see that? Because with the exponent rule, the squared gets applied to the 4. 4 squared is 16, and then to the x, which gives us our x squared. So this is the first thing. 49 is 7 squared. So one thing squared minus another thing squared, that gets us 4x plus 7 times 4x minus 7. Okay, 3 more problems in this lesson. Check this one out. Now you should be able to do this. It's very similar to the last one we did, so pause the video and give it a shot. Okay, let's see how you did. 64 is 8 squared. We can write it that way. 8 squared, z squared. Actually, I'm going to do this a little different. I'm going to go ahead and write 8z squared. Right? Because 8 squared is 64, z squared is z squared. And this one, 121, is another perfect square. It's 11 squared. So now we can go 8z minus 11 and 8z plus 11. Bingo! Okay, now this one has a little extra wrinkle to it. Notice how 2 is not a perfect square. Okay, but there's something you can do here first that will turn this expression into a perfect square. So think real hard and pause the video if you think you can do that. Okay, so if you noticed that there's a GCF in both of these already, you can factor that out. In fact, and we'll come back to this, that factoring out a GCF from an expression should always be your first step, especially if you stare at this and you go, well, that's not a perfect square, and that's not. But this is a lesson on perfect squares. So think. How do I turn this into something that I can use this new rule on? And watch this. We take out the 2. That leaves x squared. Factor 2 out of 8. That leaves us with minus 4. Now we have two perfect squares. We have x squared. 4 is 2 squared. So this is going to be 2 times x plus 2 times x minus 2. So I left out that step where I write these two things squared. So I'm incorporating my understanding and I'm making myself a little bit more efficient as I go. So I just recognized that x squared minus 4 squared is going to be x plus 2 times x minus 2. And this 2 is just along for the ride. Can't let go of it. Okay, here's another one that follows a pattern like this one. Pause the video and see what you can do. There's a GCF in there. Okay, it's a little more complicated. Okay, check this out. We don't like minus signs in front of our x squared term. This is a pretty much a universal thing when you're factoring and expanding and doing all the other things that we're going to do later with these types of problems. So there's a minus 3 I can factor out because I can factor out a minus 3 from 48. So watch this. Minus 3 times, what's left? X squared. Now, what times 3 makes 48? 16. But I factored out a minus 3. So I'm going to have minus 16 there. And the way I check is if I go minus 3 times minus 16, I get back to positive 48. Okay? So now I have my minus 3 outside. And guess what? I got a nice little perfect square right in there. So this is going to be minus 3 times x plus 4 times x minus 4. Okay, a few words of encouragement. Some students find these factoring problems a little bit challenging. And if you do, just hang in there, stay with it. Remember, there's always extra problems around the ones I assign if you need more practice. Come to Extra Help, ask questions during class. Now that you've finished, take a moment to write down any questions so you can bring them to our next class and get some help. You can also watch the video again to improve your understanding. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button down below, and if you'd like to help me grow my YouTube channel, please click subscribe.